The stories that are the headlines.
And the stories behind the headlines. This is the Story Conference. I'm Patrick Paez.
I'm at Lingao. It is Tuesday, January 30. Here are some of the stories we are watching today. Pirma National Lead Convener Noel Oñate admits that he coordinated with Speaker Martin Romualdez to help them get signatures for the People's Initiative. Oñate made the revelation during today's hearing by the Senate Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation, chaired by Senator Amy Marcos. Romualdez, however, clarified that his involvement has been, and we quote, purely advisory and not to mobilize or lead the signature campaign.
Okay. A big-time oil price hike takes effect today, January 30. Prices of gasoline are up by nearly 3 pesos per liter, and by diesel by 1 peso and 30 centavos. President Bongbong Marcos kicked off his state visit in Vietnam with a meeting with the Filipino community and Vietnamese company Vingroup. He also met with Vietnamese President Vo Van Tong this morning. Before he left Manila, the president engaged in a drug war talk with former President Rodrigo Duterte. Duterte called Marcos a drug addict, and the president blamed fentanyl for Duterte's statements. Drug war.
No.
So it's not just a word war. You know, they took it to the next level. But drug war.
I don't think we've ever seen something like this before. A president, the sitting president and the former president exchanging words about who's using what drug.
Yes.
Pilipinas like medyo surreal.
I was looking back at the past, deep digging into our stock knowledge of politics in this country. Matagal-tagal na rin tayo, Bok, eh. It has been pretty exciting, Philippine politics, I have to say. No?
Yeah.
Pero this is
never got this exciting.
This is different. This is quite unusual and peculiar. No? Number one, normally an ex-president, you hardly hear from an ex-president anymore. It's very seldom, right? Normally they choose political retirement until something really pressing comes along. I think in the case of former President Gloria Arroyo, she only came out of the woodwork, so to speak, nung magkakaroon ng charter change sa panahon ni FDR. But before that, she was content at retiring politically, not this president.
She was content at looking like Nora Honor in her Senate campaign posters.
Who is this?
Gloria Arroyo.
I meant Cory Aquino.
Cory Aquino.
Yes, Cory Aquino. Naisip ko tuloy kung kamukha rin siya ni
He said kasi Gloria
Ate Guy.
And after that, we had, for example, of course, we had ERAP, and then GMA, and then during the time of GMA, had Cory Aquino coming out.
Well, during ERAP's time, medyo si FVR hindi rin manahimik.
Pumalag din.
Nagmarcha
pa siya. Nagmarcha pa siya galing sa airport hanggang EDSA.
So, tuloy-tuloy.
We had those things, but generally, they would trade barbs over politics, not over drugs. So this is really highly unusual, if not colorful.
It's parang almost perfectly squared. Diba? Kasi may isasagot eh. Parang gano'n na nangyari eh.
Oo.
Diba? May maisasagot along the same lines.
Parang
may buwelta.
In a way nga, para sang script sa pelikula eh. Na parang may balikan eh.
May balikan.
May balikan eh.
Naswak yung sagutan. Pasok na pasok yung dalawang sagutan.
And daming quotable quotes. So, yun. Bok, yun, take a quick look at the headlines. Just a story come out today from the Inquirer.net. Amid Duterte Marcos verbal spat, public must stay neutral, say that is according to some groups. Romualdez, the speaker, says no need to be rude, referring of course to Amy Marcos. May binitaw natin si Amy na kakapal ng mga mukha.
Oo. During a Senate hearing. Today, just this afternoon.
And binanggit nga ni Pati kanina, yung lumabas kanina sa Senate hearing, sabi ni Mr. Oñate,
he slipped.
May coordination with the speaker.
And he admitted later on that when Senator Marcos, Marcos asked him.
Ba't di mo sinabi dati?
Oo, but di mo sinabi dati, and then he said, I slipped.
Oo.
So, but there's already a reply from the office of the House Speaker na coordination lang naman daw, hindi mobilization.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
Okay.
to be sure, no, Bok, the House Speaker has put it on record that he supports People's Initiative,
Yeah,
but
repeatedly.
they are not directly. There's no direct participation on the part of the House of Representatives. Yun yung clarification niya.
Which is also a tricky clarification.
Yes,
Kasi when you
yes.
say there's no direct participation, that can come in several forms and several ways of explaining it.
There could be an
Wala
indirect
namang-
encouragement.
Oo, pwede namang wala kaming pinagmitingan at wala namang order na binaba in writing and,
Right.
and so on online. But these are all possibilities, of course. But in the end, politics is about how you interpret the words.
Right.
And politicians like to interpret them differently. So you have that. And Philippine Star. Okay, BBF, of course, in Vietnam. Philippines and Vietnam signed deals on maritime incident prevention and rice trade.
Vietnam po ang ating biggest supplier ng imported rice.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mga 98 to 97% ng bigas natin ay galing Vietnam. And some people don't know that.
97% ng imported rice.
Imported rice, yeah. Imported rice, yeah.
And the
Sorry.
imported rice in the Philippines is nasa 20% lang ata. Ganun. We still produce our own rice.
Some people
Not
don't.
enough, but the rest
we
get from Vietnam.
have a very historic links with Vietnam. Not just because of PhilCag, but also because of at least the old Vietnam, the South Vietnam, the former South Vietnam.
Yes.
When Edward Lansdale was assigned in the Philippines as part of the CIA, he built a good team of Filipino, don't want to call them agents, operators who helped win the election for Ramon Magsaysay.
Yes.
And after that, Lansdale was moved to Vietnam.
Where he did not exactly succeed.
Not exactly succeed, but that was a time when South Vietnam was being formed as a government.
Yes.
Nagkakahati pala ng North and South. And Lansdale's task was to help draft the Constitution of South Vietnam. And he brought in Filipinos to help draft the Constitution.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so Filipinos
That's
actually had a part in drafting the South Vietnamese Constitution, which now does not exist anymore.
And more recently, Bok, we're talking about Vietnam being our largest supplier of imported rice. One of our undersecretaries in agriculture used to work in Vietnam. Undersecretary Sebastian. And look,
he's very well regarded.
He is very well respected, very well regarded, and his contributions
By Vietnamese too.
and he helped increase production of rice in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So instrumental po Pilipino dyan.
And Vietnam's
Hindi lang sa
major
constitution
rice producer.
nila na non-existent na ngayon, pero yung bigas po nandiyan pa rin. Yun.
And you can imagine, Vietnam is such a huge producer of rice, and yet they had to bring in a Filipino to help them get there.
I think what Undersecretary Sebastian did was to adjust rice planting, rice harvest to the changing seasons. Parang gano'n, para mas all year round yung production. Well, we also need to, siguro for people asking, why do we need to import and all that, and why is Vietnam such a powerhouse in terms of rice
They have a
production?
delta.
They have a river delta.
It's
River
the
delta po
Mekong.
yung dagat, yung Mekong River nila.
The Mekong spreads into the flatlands, into a
Flooding them
series
naturally.
of canals and small esteros, which flood during the monsoon, and it's basically irrigated,
Right.
very very well
Natural
irrigated,
irrigation. Alam niyo naman po yung rice fields po, dapat lubog sa tubig eh. Oo, dito sa atin sa Pilipinas po, we don't have a river delta system. A lot of the irrigation has to be brought in from the dams. Water collected from the dams.
Yan, laki ng bagay sa kanila yung Mekong coming down from Laos and Cambodia, at least Cambodia, and then going to Vietnam. I think it comes all the way from China or the Himalayas, but anyway. So, yun.
So this
big
trip to
difference.
Vietnam by the president is very important. It's not your usual goodwill visit, exchange visit, or that.
Not to mention-
Two major things: West Philippine Sea
West
issue,
Philippine Sea.
okay, partnership there, and rice supply. two very big
Kasi mainit sa
matters.
atin ng issue ng West Philippine Sea, pero mas mainit sa Vietnam.
Yan,
Ang issue ng West
pumapalag
Kasi ang Vietnam, sila well, they were Vietnam was the only country, I think, that ever came to blows with China over the West Philippine Sea. Over South China, I don't know if that's part of West Philippine Sea kasi bandang doon sa may Paracel Islands na tayo yun eh. Baka South China Sea yun eh. Pero they came to blows. Talagang bakbakan sila.
Oh, not just that. In 78 or 79, they were invaded by China.
Oh yeah.
Right?
And they beat them back.
They beat them back. Oo. So, parang as far as China is concerned, stalemate yan. Wala. They made their point across na tinuruan lang daw nila ng leksyon yung Vietnam for invading Cambodia.
And Vietnam has been pushing back significantly. They've tried to bring in oil drilling facilities into what they claim to be their territory. And China's been pushing it back. So talagang may kiskisan ng ganun.
Yun. Oo. Palaban.
But then again, Vietnam has a better armed force. I mean, a better equipped armed forces.
And a bigger GDP. They've already, I think, surpassed us or overtaken the Philippines. No? And not too long ago, Bok, I remember that Vietnam, maybe about 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, a lot of the investors in Vietnam, when Vietnam was still trying to practice some market capitalism, free market capitalism, free market. A lot of the entrepreneurs there were Filipinos from here. Now we're hearing that the Vietnamese are interested in investing in the Philippines.
And it was only only 49 years ago that Vietnam was united.
And coming from the devastation of war.
Yeah.
Oh, nabangon nila
Millions
yan.
of tons of bombs dropped and chemicals as well.
Maybe nakatulong Bok yung mga baso ng bala na nalaglag doon. Baka nakatulong sa industrialization
Makes for an iron-rich soil, ganun.
Yun, di ba?
Industrialization, no?
Binakal nila yung mga
So yeah, we have those big stories coming up today. We are also as well, I think, trying to invite a senior member of the House of Representatives. I think we're still trying to get him to talk about, among other things, yung discussions in the Senate. Very interesting discussions in the Senate, and we're trying to see where it's headed. But so far, yun ang lumabas na may coordination daw with the Speaker. Okay. Well, still in line with the with the many things that have been happening, including yung bakbakan ng mga Pangulo at dating Pangulo at yung issue ng Chacha. Let's bring in international investment banker Stephen Kuunyeng. Sir, magandang hapon and
hello,
thank you for
sir.
joining
Magandang
us.
hapon din. And thank you for inviting me again.
Yes, sir. Sir, ibang programa naman. ibang programa naman. But same channel. Okay. Sir, teka. Well, we were having this discussion kasi earlier this morning. We have an unusual situation where you have a sitting president and a former president nagbabakbakan over the use of drugs. the alleged use of drugs. Parang it comes at a time when we're supposed to be talking about things like economic provisions of the Constitution and how to move forward, how to bring in more investors. I don't know. I suppose
we're still coming out of the devastation caused by the pandemic, also, Mr. Kunyeng. So I wonder, number one, how we know what netizens think, but we're wondering how the business community sees this, all this political noise.
They feel very bad about this because the talking about drugs is a sideshow. It's shadow boxing over the real issue. The real issue is constitutional change, and they're just throwing these ad hominems at each other as a proxy fight. And the problem is there's nothing wrong with opposition criticizing an administration and an administration criticizing the opposition back. The problem is they're supposed to be together. Wasn't the whole campaign unity?
Pero yun nga, sir, all this discussion about making significant changes in the basic law now overshadowed by this. So is for example, is the business community still looking at that possibility at this point, or talagang let's just watch the circus?
Okay, well, they don't like watching a circus because it detracts from real business and it detracts from progress. And we have enough challenges and issues that we don't want a soap opera taking the place of a real administration, real addressing of issues. Now, but I don't think this is a soap opera. This is just the way they are fighting over whether the Constitution will be changed or not. Because clearly, one side believes the way to do it is this way. But the question is not what, the real issue is not what is the way we're going to do it, but what is the end result they are seeking to change in the Constitution. Now, because if you, but businessmen are pragmatic people. They're not politicians. They live in the real world and deal with what the circumstances are and make the best of it and minimize what are the challenges. The problem, so basically, if you can open up certain things, some people want it, some people don't. Some people want to change the system, some people want it, some people don't. But they will operate regardless. The problem is this is distracting from effective operation of the government, whether the executive or the legislative branch, because right now it's a food fight.
Well, sir, it's not just a food fight. I suppose it's also a fight over who gets control over the refrigerator. Kasi nga, the discussion right now, at least before this bakbakan over drugs, was whether there should be joint voting or separate voting, in which case the Senate could be overshadowed by a bigger Congress.
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
And because, okay, what basically is the fear of the Senate? That there will be no more Senate. Let's not really argue that they're fighting over economic provisions this way or that way. This kind of passion is when your position is at stake. And if there's going to change to a unicameral, whether you call it parliamentary, whether you call it prime minister, whether you just have one house of Congress and a Senate, the question is one house of Congress and a president. The real battle is systemic, not economic. And the Senate wants to be able to block it so that it will only be at best economic changes and not systemic, so the Senate stays in place. If you read the other people, it's also that. So, I mean, I'm not a political analyst, so I'm not going to claim this system is better or that system is better, although I have my own personal views. And whether some economic, I mean, I'm on record previously on another show of yours and everything saying I'm very worried about wholesale removal of nationality issues in everything. For me, this is a shadow boxing. They're saying, oh, we need to open it up to foreign investments. We are open. It's only the limited industries that are reserved that are not open. But let's say I want to set up a tech company here, a BPO, I can be 100% foreign. I want to set up a bank, I can now be foreign. It's only certain utilities. Now, certain sectors like media, education, you can argue about, but I'm saying, but basically it's utilities. Now, if you go to other countries in the world, America, Rupert Murdoch had to give up his Australian citizenship and become an American to become publisher of the New York Post. Because in the US, not only does media, utilities, and transportation have to be majority American owned, it has to be run by American citizens. All right? Why do they do that? Because, as I said in another place, these are considered the commanding heights of an economy, which means it is more than profit at stake. It is national security, national progress, and there's therefore not just profit and loss, but national interest at stake. Now, I'm happy to have that debate with people. I think otherwise everything should be open to foreign investment. But the answer is it already is, with the exception of some sectors like media and education. But even in the US, as I said, Rupert Murdoch had to become a citizen to become publisher of the New York Post. right?
That's
Not
interesting.
even
That's interesting.
give up. So this now, and in Vietnam, as I said, which everybody says is an economic powerhouse, they allow zero foreign investment in basic telecommunication, landlines and cell phones. Zero. Banks, 30%.
Okay.
Petroleum basically power distribution and transmission, zero. So I'm happy to have a robust because they view that as imbued with the national interest. For example, they want to expect to do something more dynamic in distribution and generation. They feel, rightly or wrongly, if it was with the private sector, there would be a profit motive. While if we want to, frankly, subsidize it or have lower rates because national development requires it, then it will be something we could make a national priority. Now, that's the economic side. Now, I'm happy to have this debate. I think I take a middle view, which is certain things should have some restrictions, everything else should not.
Okay.
But I think all this fervor is because of what they're really worried about is the political system and whether there will still be a Senate or there will not be a Senate.
Okay. Sir, correct me if I'm wrong. You don't seem to agree that there are constitutional restrictions to investments. That's what I gathered from what you're saying.
No, I think there are. What I'm saying is, in some cases, they're reasonable.
Oh, okay.
But
Yep.
except for where there are no restrictions.
Okay.
Now, except for the areas reserved, there are no restrictions.
Okay. But you mentioned at the same time that there are systemic, quote unquote, problems. I just wonder what you mean by systemic problems, Mr. Konyeng.
No, it's something I've said elsewhere. Like, our systemic problems is we don't have food security. We're a manufacturing desert. And so therefore, and we have a population growth problem. So with those systemic issues, my view is those require a change in attitude and priority of both the government and the private sector. And unless we deal with all three, which is food security, manufacturing desert because of poor infrastructure and high power rates, and high population growth, there's a reason why, if you go back from basically the 1960s onwards, whether we're a democracy, a dictatorship, a democracy again, we are consistently falling behind all our neighbors.
And why is that, sir? Mr. Konyeng?
As I said, the same thing. First of all, when I'm turning 65 in April, when I was born, there were 19 million Filipinos. There are now 115 million. Our population growth rate is higher than Bangladesh or India. If China had the same population growth rate that we have now, we've had over the last 65 years, my lifetime, there would be 3.5 billion Chinese, not 1.4. And everybody talks about this demographic dividend. Where's the dividend to us? China, which had the draconian one-child policy, has had the highest economic growth over the last 40 years of any country in the world. Yet, they don't have the demographic dividend. So what's the point there? The demographic dividend works when you have a fully employed population. That's like in Scandinavia and certain Northern Europe. In an area where you have to tell 12 million people, find a job abroad or you'll starve, there is no demographic dividend to speak of because you cannot even employ the people coming into the workforce. So that's one. The other systemic issue is I forget who Senator George Aiken said, I've never seen a nation starved into prosperity. Why do people subsidize agricultural products and food products in Japan, Korea, Western Europe? The European Union was set up for steel and iron and then agriculture. The US has subsidies. Why? Because they feel for society to be stable and peaceful, it has to be fed. So they make sure there is excess food and then they subsidize it by selling it cheaply outside because so there will always be food security. And here we are, we have the highest population growth and then we cannot feed our people. And every year, we just keep importing more and more staples, and we have neither food security nor cheap prices because we have the highest food prices among the major countries in Asia. I'm talking about the high populated. I'm not talking about city-states, okay? But compare our prices to Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. Our food prices are at least 30% higher, in some cases more. So we neither have food security nor cheap prices for import. Now, how are you going to have, if you're already trying to grow and you have to put a higher proportion of your take-home pay to food, to transportation, to utilities, how are you going to have consumer-led growth? Then the only proven mass employer of a large population country that has brought people from being marginal to prosperity and middle class is manufacturing. There's only one country, major country I know, that was able to go to first world without manufacturing, and that's Ireland. Because they became like the BPO in the 1980s for insurance companies. They did that with a total population of 5 million people. You cannot, our BPO has about 1.8 million employees. That's what? Roughly 1% of the population.
Yes, sir. Sir, going back to what you were saying a while ago, tama ba intindi ko that as far as you can see, the existing restrictions in the Constitution for the economy are already somewhat reasonable?
In my view,
Yes,
they
sir.
are.
Yes, sir.
Because certain areas in the economy, which I consider more than just profit.
I asked that kasi nga, of course, we've heard the argument time and again that we need to further open up the economy to bring in more investors, encourage them to come in with more money, and that would include, of course, allowing them to have land ownership in the Philippines, something that we don't see in, for example, Vietnam or in China, where you have investors flocking in.
You cannot own land in Vietnam. You cannot
Yes, sir.
own land in Hong Kong. They don't strike me as people who are having a hard time getting foreign investment. So land ownership, as long as you have proper long-term leases with land use rights, it's not a deal breaker. Now, will it help? Probably it will help, but it's not like such a critical issue that it's going to make or break economic progress. That's my view on land ownership. I give it, you cannot give it. I frankly think it's a minor issue. Now, on utilities and certain sectors, for example, one of the things with, let's say, airlines in the US, in times of emergency, the US Armed Forces uses them to transport troops and material. All right? That's why it has to be 51% American owned and American managed. Now, the same people who want to open up your utilities are the same people saying we should buy back NGCP. Make up your mind. Do you want to open it up or you want to sell it? Now, can you imagine all the complaints people are making on NGCP if at that time it was privatized, it was allowed 100% foreign ownership? I wonder what people would be saying now.
Yeah, because it's now, 40% owned by China.
Yeah. And then people are complaining. And what more if it was 100% foreign? My point is, some things need a reasonable balance. Now, everything else, yes, completely free, open markets. And you know what? That's generally the rule here, except for some other things like media, like education, like some professions. You have to be a Filipino to be a lawyer, the medical profession, things like that. But apart from those, it's pretty much open.
Well, sir, of course, you've seen the Edsapuera commercial that was very, very well made. It strikes a chord with a lot of Filipinos on the ground. Pero nga, the message being na napag-iwanan tayo because of all these restrictions. So it's actually good to hear what you're saying.
My answer is logic and experience. If other countries with more restrictions are the ones who left us, then are the restrictions the reason we got left behind? Right? You cannot have a premise that is not proven. if let's say your premise is if you open it up to everything, we will not. This wouldn't have happened. But yet, you look at China, where you couldn't even get into telecom before, and now telecom can only be minority owned, and it's not even private sector companies that own it, but the state. And same Vietnam. And I mentioned the other examples earlier. So is that okay, we're mixing two things. Have we been left behind by everybody? Yes. But that doesn't mean that's the reason, because other people who have zoomed ahead of us have restrictions even greater than us. So maybe the problem is not the restrictions, the problem is something else.
Okay.
But is there a problem? Yes. Have we fallen behind? Yes. Are we a laggard over 60 years, regardless of political system? Yes. But is your solution the solution? If that was such a gating item, why has Vietnam done so well? Why has China done so well? When their foreign restrictions are greater than ours.
Okay. Mr. Konyang, I'm curious if you find the political provisions of our Constitution are the ones that actually need some revision.
I am open to that. I have said previously, in a weird way, I find the night. And by the way, nobody cares what you're about to say. I actually think, because I'm a lapsed lawyer, I used to be a lawyer. If you take out the transitory provisions and Amendment 6, the hybrid presidential and parliamentary system we had under the 1973 Constitution actually was worth trying out. It's sort of like an Asian version of the French system, where you have a president who runs foreign policy, runs defense, that's the program of government, but subject to majority vote, appoints the prime minister. And the prime minister runs the government day to day and the economy, and it's a unicameral legislation. Now, do I think? See, because what's the problem? The people who want the Senate say, if you have only one unicameral system and parliamentary, it will be pork barrel galore. There'll be no accountability because it'll be the congressmen choosing their leaders. Now, what is the comment against the presidential system? It is inefficient. You have separate legislature and executive, and now we even have a bicameral legislature, so everything is slow. You cannot get people to move fast in an emergency, and lawmaking and execution is separate and disjointed, while in a parliamentary it's one. Now, we have to also respect our own traditions and our own culture, and I thought something along the lines of what the French are doing, which if the first President Marcos hadn't loaded the 1973 Constitution with all those transitory provisions and Amendment 6, might have been an experiment worth trying. The problem is the 1973 Constitution was never implemented because from the one it was passed, it was the transitory provisions which allowed the president, Marcos, to act as a dictator because he could both legislate and execute solely. And then even when the interim Batasang Pambansa came up in 1984, he still could legislate, even if the legislature could legislate also. So what happened is the 1973 Constitution was never tried.
Well, it sounds a lot like 1978, Mr. Konyang. The 1978 Constitution. That sounds a lot like it. The French model.
I think you mean 1987, because you said 1978.
1978, if I'm not mistaken, the French model, when we had Prime Minister Cesar Virata, a unicameral parliament.
It was an amendment to the Constitution of 1973.
Yeah. Well, it was 78, 79 when they had the IBP.
Yeah, it was.
You mentioned, I'm curious, you mentioned the French model, which was, in my youth, that was what Marcos wanted in 78, 79, was the French model. A president and a prime minister.
Let me correct you. The prime minister came a little later, not in 1978, number one, even though there was the interim Batasang Pambansa. Okay. I'm 55, I was old enough to vote in 1970. Okay. But the problem is, it was not the point of having a prime minister It was having a legislature. And here in France, the president cannot enact laws on his own. In the 1973 Constitution, all the way up to the time it was replaced, the president never gave up his decree-making power. That's why you had presidential decrees. Okay? So in effect, the 1973 Constitution, on surface, when Virata was made prime minister, sort of followed that. But it followed that in form only, not in substance. Because in substance, you did not have a legislature, unicameral as it was, that was the sole entity to legislate. The executive could still issue presidential decrees all the way up to 1986.
Okay, ano po? Bitaw natin si Sir.
I think that there's a lot to digest there, Mr. Kunyeng. Thank you so much for your time.
Wanted to say, and thank you for inviting me again, is this is a very complex thing. There are really substantial political and economic issues and our future at stake. I would like to say I'm happy you're discussing it in such depth rather than just the horse race aspect. Because the horse race aspect is the most exciting, but it's the least important. The least important, what kind of economic changes and what kind of political system are we going to have?
Right.
Sir, pasingit lang, sir. Kasi it occurs to me na parang in the end, it boils down to a question of confidence and trust in...
My takeaway, Bok, is there's nothing wrong with the economic provisions. I mean, it could do some changes maybe, but it's more like the political system.
But even the political system, if you have a parliamentary or unicameral system, it works with other countries. But in our case, parang naku, term extension, o kaya naku, no election. So it boils down again to a matter of trust in the people you have in the legislature.
Here is what I've said in the past about the trust issue. In the mid-1990s, roughly the same time or slightly ahead of when President Ramos wanted to amend the Constitution to allow a second term, Peru did it, Brazil did it, and Argentina did it. They went from 1 6-year term to 2 4-year terms. Why were they able to do it? And their constitutions were also new. The three all came out of dictatorships and all constitutions in the 80s. Okay? Why did those three succeed and why did we fail? Because in those three countries, when there was a popular president, his party campaigned in the midterm saying, I want these changes. And so rather than try to sneak it, they said, let us make it the primary issue of the midterm election. And when his party, in those three countries, when the party won, they said, we have a clear mandate, not just to change the constitution, but for these specific changes we campaigned on.
Okay.
So they're willing to use the political capital, capital, and risk it.
They risked their political capital for the changes. They got a vote of yes from the people by re-electing them. And so therefore, then they had the political capital to make the change. Because it was ventilated, it was discussed, and they're saying, if you vote for me, you are voting for these changes.
Yeah, so it might help if the House leadership comes out clean and say they want to maybe change as well
it also helps
some of the political provisions.
You fight for something that at least on the surface looks like it's going to work against you in the future, but it's not in self-interest.
Yeah, parang diretsuhan na. And I think I actually think we need fundamental political change. The all constitutions. The U.S. Constitution has been amended how many times? 30 times. There is nothing wrong with amending a constitution. It's just it has to be done carefully and thoughtfully, and more important, openly.
With transparency, right?
Yes, because it's not just like repealing a law. It is the fundamental law from which all other laws and government actions are based.
Okay.
So if you're going to make a change, it should be properly ventilated, properly drained, as you said, with transparency and openness, so that if you make the change, there is real, you didn't like slide it in.
Right. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Kunyeng. Thank you so much.
Stephen Kunyeng.
It clears a lot of things.
Always a pleasure,
especially,
sir.
it's good to know that in Vietnam, they have the same restrictions. And they're way ahead
More
of us.
restricted ba?
But I'm saying, if you want substance, then do it, make the process proper.
Okay. Thank you again, Mr. Kunyeng, Mr. Stephen Kunyeng,
Thank you,
a global investment banker, retired, and having fun. And fortunately for us, granting interviews.
Saka higit sa lahat, wag nang ipasok sa usapan yung droga. Kakagulo lalo.
Masaya pa rin eh. Okay. But kita mo naman, we started with the drug world war, ended up with something more substantive. And we learned something new. Because we've never really been able to benchmark what restrictions there are in our constitution vis-a-vis the constitution of let's say, Vietnam, which is, seems to be attracting a lot of
And
investors.
pati yung US Constitution pala, ang daming restrictions for foreign ownership eh. Diba?
So, ganun rin pala.
And also in China, I mean...
So dapat, ang recommendation ni Mr. Kunyeng, aminin na ng House na it's the political provisions that they want changed. And Mr. Kunyeng seems to agree that that needs to be reviewed. Right?
But it all boils down to a matter
Sa
of
elephant
trust.
in the room, huh?
It all boils
down to a matter of trust. But pero pag tinatago kasi Bok, lalo nagdududa tao. Right?
Eh, diba, parang parang sa mga lalaki.
Yun.
Kahit mahuli ka, huwag kang aamin. Oop, teka.
Tama ba yun? Baka ano pa masabi mo, Bok?
You're watching Storycon on One News. We just need to take a quick break. We will be back in a bit.
This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group. The stories that are the headlines and the stories behind the headlines. Welcome back to the Story Conference. I'm Patrick Paez with Mr. Bok Ed Lingao.
Hello, magandang hapon sa inyo. At Tuesday na. Ha?
Haba ng interview natin.
Oo, pero masaya yung interview
Marami
eh.
nakapili.
Kasi hindi ganang kadalas na makakausap ka ng na expert sa negosyo, sa business, sa investments. Na pag magkwento, parang para ka nagiinuman. Maling ano. What you get what I mean?
Pero English.
Kung ano ibig sabihin. Pero madaling maintindihan, madaling maghimay. Di ba? Suwabing-suwabe. So, anyway, you picked up a lot of things from that. Anyway, let's move on siguro. Makati City has received a 672 billion peso grant for the purchase of 40 electric buses. That's as the Makati subway project is stalled due to the city's row with Taguig. For more details, we have Gerard de la Peña of News 5. Gerard, anong balita dyan?
Bok, 2018 kasi nung formal na simulan yung pagpapagawa ng Makati subway. At sa katotohanan nga yan, may mga hukay na dun sa bandang Pilpuyat Avenue. May mga nabili na ring mga properties tatamaan ng proyekto. Pero nagdesisyon ang Makati LGU na itigil na muna yung project na kung hindi nagka-pandemya, ay tapos na sana sa susunod na taon. Kaya yung tunnel boring machine na parang katulad ng ginagamit dun sa Metro Manila subway at iba pang equipment na gagamitin sana sa pag-ukay ng pinaplanong 10-kilometer subway ay tengga na sa City Hall ng Makati. Apektado ang project na ito ng pagkakalipat ng ilang bahagi ng Makati sa Taguig. According to the original plan book, may isang subway station sana sa University of Makati at isang hospital ng Makati. Sa EMBO naman sana ilalagay yung depot o yung lugar kung ginagarahe yung mga train para sa maintenance at dispatch. Pero dahil bahagi na ito ng Taguig ngayon, mahirapan na kung itutuloy pa yung project. Kung mababawasan ng mga estasyon ang Makati Subway, bawas din ang pasahero na maaaring ikalugi ng private investor. Kaya ayon kay Makati Mayor Abigail Binay, wala na yung tinatawag na economies of scale at hindi na sulit ito para sa mga investor.
Okay.
Wala tulong sana itong project na ito. Yes.
Gerard, itong 672 billion peso grant, saan galing? Para dun sa mga electric vehicles?
Okay. Itong grant na ito, galing daw ito sa isang
medyo choppy. Saan daw galing, Bo?
Saan daw? Hindi ko lang kasi kung ganyan kalaki magbigay ng grant
Bigla na, pag kilao ka na, laki na amount eh. No?
Kasi pag grant, ano yan, walang balik yan.
Oo, bigay yan. Halos bigay yan.
Oo.
May mga kondisyon, pero halos
Pero
bigay yan.
malaking grant.
Laki, oo. Ilang electric vehicles. Pero Bo, pwede pa matuloy yung ano?
Yung Makati
Subway,
Subway.
oo.
This Makati Subway to, hindi Makati Subway.
Kasi kung problem, pwede pa matuloy.
Kung kung tumakbo.
We're just being a little naughty here. No, yun lang. Tingnan natin, malay natin.
Ito na. Sir Jared, nandiyan ka ba ba?
Yes.
Bok, teka, yung 672, that's a grant ha. Ibig sabihin, hindi yan loan, hindi yan kailangan ibalik. Ibig sabihin, binibigay na yan. Tama ba?
Tama, bigay. Yun ang kwento sa atin ni Mayor Binay.
Bigay nino, Gerard.
Naputol ka dun eh.
Okay, hindi ko nakuha yung exact name nung nagbigay ng grant, pero it's from a South Korean group.
Yun,
Okay, yung mga Koreano.
Ayos sila, ha? Electric vehicles, right? Oo.
So, teka, tama intindi ko ba na dahil nga sa pagkakalipat ng EMBO barangays doon sa Taguig, yan ang main reason kung bakit hindi na matutuloy itong
economies of scale, Bob. Hindi na malulugi yung investor kung ang biyahe lang niya biyaheng Makati lang.
So yun lang yun. Yun ang dahilan.
Yes. Yun yung primary reason kung bakit hindi natuloy. Kasi originally, doon sa plano, 10 stasyon dapat yung meron yung Makati Subway. Pero I think magiging 8 na lang yung station. So parang mababawasan yung pasahero, hindi na siya economically viable.
Pero sabi nga ni Patrick, ang solusyon dyan is political in nature. Napag-usapan niyo ba yun with Mayor Binay?
Pwede naman sila mag-usap ng mga Cayetano. Diba?
May ibubulong ako sa inyo. Hindi namin napag-usapan ni Mayor Binay. Pero may nagbulong sa akin off the record.
Yun.
Kung maganda sana raw yung relationship ng Makati and Taguig, baka raw nagawan pa ng paraan.
Pwede naman kasi daanin sa usapan yan, di ba, Gerard? Gerard, anyway, transport reporter ka, you're the transport correspondent of News 5. May balita ba tayo na may update ba naman tayo dun sa yung pinaka-main subway project ng DOTR?
Alam nyo, sa last kaming nagpunta doon, tinor kami ng DOTR doon sa Metro Manila Subway was January last year. After noon, wala na kaming update. Tapos ang kwento pa nga sa amin nun, parang around 200 meters na yung nahuhukay mula doon sa Valenzuela papuntang Quirino Avenue. That was January last year, and ang target dapat by this time tapos na yung kahabaan ng ng Valenzuela to Quirino Avenue. Quirino Highway. Pero wala pa tayong update kung kung kumusta na talaga.
Is there a reason bakit medyo mabagal, Gerard? Is there right of way involved in this? Ganon, sa pagtatayo ng subway?
Wala masyadong right of way issues dito kasi 'di ba yung
Underground.
mainly ilalim naman talaga. Yung right of way issues dito kung magkakaroon man, yung mga stations lang sa ibabaw. Na most of them are government properties. Like meron dun sa tapat ng Kamuning, meron sa may Katipunan na parte ng Camp Aguinaldo yata yun. So medyo nagawa ng paraan. Imbestigahan natin ang naging cause of delay kasi medyo matagal na nga yan.
Okay, Gerard de la Peña, maraming salamat sa iyong oras. Gerard de la Peña of News 5. Binigyan tayong update dun sa So in lieu of the Makati subway, they're gonna have electric vehicles.
So traffic pa rin.
Traffic pa rin. Oh, actually, gridlock ang Makati during at any time of day, within the central business district.
January na. Ang EDSA gatong oras ng traffic ko, wala pang rush hour. Anyway.
May nakapila pa sa atin.
Okay, sige. Bok, let's bring in again our One News editor, si Mr. Robenal Francisco.
Yan. Ready na. Sa totoo lang.
At mukhang hindi rin dahil na kami.
Hindi pa nasasabi ni Ed yung punchline niya na siya ay na-traffic dyan sa tinuturo niya ang daan na yan. Yeah. Kaya alam niya yung lagay ng traffic ko dyan, Ed Lingao.
Teka, ano yung punchline? Punchline wala, hindi ko lang.
Na-traffic ka.
Hindi punchline.
Anyway, so mga editors natin at saka syempre I think yung maski yung mga News 5 desk nakatutok sila doon lang, hindi naman lang, marami ibang balita pero yung attention ay talagang nakalagay doon sa naging hearing kanina sa mataas na kapulungan sa Senado. At of course we were expecting based sa mga teaser ni Senator Amy Marcos at ilang senador days before yung actual hearing today ay yung paglabas ng mga pumirma ng affidavit saying na sila ay nabayaran, na sila ay pumirma because of promises hindi pa yun natatalakay, so I guess magkakaroon pa ng continuation ito. It was really about interviewing or asking questions sa
Joby,
members sa COMELEC.
Meron pa meron bang nahimay doon sa testimony ni Mr. Oñate? Di ba nag-isa siya doon sa tanong na kung si Speaker Romualdez may kinalaman doon sa sa People's Initiative, at nabanggit kanya na nag-coordinate. May paghihimay ba doon? May nuancing pa ba kami kailangan malaman?
Anyway, aside from yung kanyang participation dun sa EDSA Puera ad campaign na medyo medyo interesting din yung part na yun. Yes, kasi doon yung tinatawag nila kanina parang mga dulas about or yung admission nga na may mga meetings at saka pakipag-coordinate with some members of Congress including the Speaker. Tapos ay nagkaroon nga diba si Senator Amy na mga maanghang na mga salita, although walang pinatutukuyan alam natin na gano'n. Interestingly, naglabas si Speaker Romualdez ng kanyang statement habang kainitan nung hearing kanina sa Senate, pero wala siyang pinatulan na specific dun sa mga question about his involvement doon sa pirma or sa PI campaign. Sinasabi lang niya na sana hindi daw rude. There's no need to be rude, sabi niya. at saka sana ay more meaningful yung discussion. So pero no denial and no tackling of yung mga naging pahayag na siya ay nadawit doon sa usapin sa Senado kanina. Ang nagsalita for him karamihan ay mga kongresista kanina na humarap sa media doon sa lower house para naman sabihin na organic daw yung mga naganap na pagkalap ng pirma sa kanilang mga lugar. Pero again, wala silang pag-amin na meron silang direkta na partisipasyon doon sa pagkalap ng mga pirma. Ed.
Pag sinabing organic, ibig sabihin hindi artificial.
Hindi artificial. Organic ang word na ginamit mismo ni Representative Geraldine Roman sa kanyang press con doon sa Congress kaninang hapon. Organic.
Tsaka we have a bit of news, Jovi, no, na nag-sorry pala si Mayor Baste.
Yes.
Kay Amy during the Davao City rally that same night.
That's the BTS that we've been parang asking ano ba nangyari because we saw Senator Amy with Vice President Sara Duterte during that event, and we alam naman natin nagkaroon ng mga pahayag doon si Mayor Baste Duterte. So nagsorry daw at
sorry siya for asking for her brother's resignation.
For the resignation, So siya naman daw ay naiintindihan niya yung bugso ng damdamin. Yun ang isa sa mga naging statement ni Senator Amy. Pero nung siya tanungin ng media, what about yung reaction niyo po doon sa mas mabibigat na sinabi po ni former President Duterte tungkol sa inyong kapatid? Sabi niya, huwag na daw siyang isali doon, Patrick and Ed.
Ayun. Mahirap, no? She's torn, no? Mahirap yung position ni Senadora Amy Marcos. You're torn between your brother
and ihahabol ko na doon
main political ally.
Ihahabol ko na Ed and Patrick na aside from the PIDEA, ang PNP nag-release din ng kanilang statement kanina via Colonel Jean Franco saying na they don't have any knowledge or hindi sila makahanap ng any document na magpo-prove doon sa allegation na nasa listahan ang presidente tulad po ng naging pahayag ni PRRD.
She's torn between her brother and her adopted sister.
Tinutugtugan na ako dito parang magsisimulado ang programa, sabi ng mga producer dito. Pero so yun, far ang ating mga nakalap na mga balita na dapat hintayin sa totoo lang, sa frontline, pati na rin sa The Big Story.
Okay, at yan po ang story conference for Friday. Those are the stories that are the headlines, the stories behind the headlines. I'm Lingao.
I'm Patrick Paez. Join us again tomorrow for the Story Conference at 4 p.m. Good afternoon. We are One News, all sides, all the time. This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group.